Before I introduce our panelists, we have been gathering resources on the homepage of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and we invite any of you that have resources that have been helpful to you that you would like to share with your colleagues, send them to us. Michael and I are on email regularly and we will post them. If you open your chat box, and for those of you who are less familiar with Zoom, if you click the chat button at the bottom, a box will open to your right. And Michael is putting in the chat box 2 Google Docs we've been working with. One is where people can share things that they're trying, things that are working, things that aren't working. Tell us what you need. Michael and I are responding to those. If you include your email address or phone number, you can reach out to one another. There's a second Google Doc that's more focused on people who are trying to move teaching online, whether it be CPE or classroom teaching, and we're also gathering resources there. So we think that those Google Docs are the best way for all of us to be in conversation with one another. So fill them in, respond, engage in that way. Otherwise, please tell us in the chat box or in emails to Michael and I what else you need. We will be having another webinar on Friday at 2 o'clock, confirmed about 30 minutes ago. Petra Sprick, who is a chaplain at Carolinas Healthcare, and Deborah Ingram, who is a staff chaplain at Advocate Aurora Health in Illinois, will be offering a webinar much like this one about how to very quickly move into telechaplaincy. Deborah built a telechaplaincy program over the last 2 years. We understand that many of us have 2 days, so that will be as focused and specific as possible. Okay, so let me introduce our panelists and then I'm gonna get out of the way. Will Whitmore, Will, you wanna wave and say hi? Is a minister at Mercersburg Academy in central Pennsylvania, and he's gonna moderate this conversation. We're joined by Carrie Doehring, a professor of pastoral care at Iliff School of Theology in Denver, Colorado, by Jennifer Bailey, the founder and executive director of Faith Matters in Nashville, Tennessee, who was responding to the tornadoes in Nashville before coronavirus hit us. We are hoping to get Tahara Akmal on here. She's having a bit of a problem with our link. She's an ACPE educator at Washington, MedStar Hospital Health in Washington, DC. And Bridget Piggue, who is a CPE educator at Emory Midtown Atlanta, also may be joining us. And we have Trace Haythorn here, who is the executive director of the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. We've asked each of these people to say just a few words about their own response, thoughts, ideas of support, anything really they want to share in brief, and then we're going to turn to the Q&A. I also forgot to introduce Elaine Yuen, who I see, welcome Elaine, who is on the faculty at Naropa Institute. Will, to you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you all so much for being here. It's really just an unprecedented time, and that even feels like an understatement. So the fact that so many of us are gathered here together to support one another is a real testament to the care that you're providing, but also the care that you probably need as well. So I hope over this time we can help provide that. I'm just going to ask the panel to go around. We're going to start with Carrie, and we can just go down to Jen and kind of through the squares, if you will. And I just would love it if you could provide some brief reflections on what you're doing, but also if there's anything you can suggest as well of personal practices you've been doing. If you have questions for the panel, if you look on the bottom, there's a Q&A box. I would love it if you could ask the questions there. I'll compile them, and after our brief reflections, I'll kind of give those out to the panel, if you will. So Carrie, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I compiled some thoughts, and Michael just posted it, on coping with moral struggles arising from the coronavirus, particularly how we can help ourselves. And I thought of the metaphor of our spiritual oxygen mask, and invite you each to think on what spiritual practices have helped you cope in the past with acute stress. And many breath-centered spiritual practices begin with that deep breath, and let's all try it together. Take a deep breath and hold it in for a few seconds, and then slowly release. And if we can get into a routine of using a practice like this, a breath-centered practice, we start to become much more aware of stress overload in our bodies, but it also attunes us to the particular ways we experience stress, what sets off stress and the intense emotions that go with stress. And I'd like to suggest to each of you that Your stress response is like a fingerprint with unique patterns shaped by your life experiences, especially of trauma, or your vulnerabilities, especially mental and health vulnerabilities. And formative experiences can make us vulnerable to anxiety, panic, worry, ruminations, depression, cravings to cope in addictive ways. So using these breath-centered practices slow us down and help us reflect upon often the kind of orientations to the suffering we're facing that come out of childhood and kind of socially limiting perspectives on stress. I also want to remind us all that stress brings out the best and the worst in us, especially relationally. And that relational tensions in intimate family and work relationships are likely to worsen. For those of us who internalize stress, we're going to ruminate, worry more. For those who externalize stress, they're going to act out that stress in ways that could be neglectful or abusive. So the more we can use calming practices, the more we can actually save lives. And the last thing I'll suggest is that if you can find trusted others with whom to share the kind of moral and spiritual struggles that arise from you in this facing this suffering, the more you'll be ready to provide spiritual care to others, to be compassionately accountable to others for using your own spiritual practices. And then that'll help you explore core values that you want to enact today. And then you'll have accountable others in which to touch base on how you're experiencing moral struggles. To me, this is the kind of spiritual first aid we can offer to ourselves in a time of disaster spiritual care.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, would you like to say a few words, please?
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for gathering today. I know that each of us is feeling this moment in different ways in our bodies and in our hearts and in our spirits. And so taking this moment to pause and be together in community feels really, really important in this moment. And so thank you. Thank you for saying yes to this moment. Just to give you a little bit of context, my name is Reverend Jennifer Bailey. I lead an organization called Faith Matters Network. And over the past several years, we've been doing work really thinking about what it looks like to chaplain social movements in this season. So those on the front lines of social change, community organizers and activists and others who are regularly encountering primary and secondary trauma. That's shown up for us a lot in the past 2 weeks. We're based here in Nashville, Tennessee, that's experienced a horrific tornado that has really devastated many of our local communities. And it has been the role of chaplains who have shown up to accompany communities now. So thank you so dearly for the work that you do. And I thought what I might offer very briefly is a practice that really grounds our work at Faith Matters Network. We start many of our meetings in spaces of holding space together with a poem that my colleague Mickey Scott-Bay-Jones wrote called An Invitation to Brave Space, which I will read now because I think one of the things that we are all being called to do in the variety of hats we wear, whether you are chaplaining in a school context or in a hospital context right now, or in the military, wherever this might show up, we're each being asked to create brave spaces for people in this moment. And so I am gonna offer my reflection very quickly because I'm really curious about the questions that you're holding by reading this poem, An Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott-Bay-Jones, Faith Matters Network. And it says, "Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love, We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. These spaces, these virtual spaces that we're being called to create in this moment will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. And so my hope is that this chaplaincy innovation community will be a brave space for you as you continue to think about what it looks like to show up fully in your vocation in this moment, that the spaces that you are creating and being asked to create, which are so different, right? I mean, I think about my other life. I'm a ministerial staff at a local church, and we're being asked to do things online with our predominantly elderly congregation that is stretching our imagination for what religious service looks like right now. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share that piece with you, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I muted my mic. I apologize. Elaine, thank you so much, Jennifer. That was beautiful, and I appreciate you sharing the poem. Elaine, would you mind sharing a few words, please?
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm an educator at Naropa in Boulder, Colorado, but I also did all my clinical work in Philadelphia. So I'm really keeping track of a lot of my networks are back east, and I also did work in Italy, which is actually suffering a lot of sort of what Carrie mentioned, the moral quandaries of having to decide who to give care to. And I remember during Katrina, we had the same conundrum, but now it's worldwide. I'm actually really happy to hear everyone talk about space. And as a Buddhist, we talk about space a lot, actually. And what I just thought I'd mention is how I think about teaching chaplaincy practice is sort of, first of all, what's your understanding? What's your understanding of our human condition, actually? And in my heart, in my tradition, my understanding is that all of humanity has a basically good heart. And I clinically, I believe that can go across many faith traditions. In Buddhism, we talk about the awakened heart, or bodhicitta, but clinically, I found that heart is definitely possible to touch in our clinical interactions. And so then the question becomes, how do we stabilize that, or how do we even evoke that through poetry? I really love the poem that Jennifer just read, or taking a breath, as Carrie mentioned. And so we have many applications to sort of go towards that intention of keeping our heart open to everyone, even though we might be triggered or feeling uncomfortable. I go along with Jennifer. There's no such thing as a safe space. There's only the spaces that we feel comfortable in, that we can actually extend ourselves, maybe even 50%. So that's kind of what I wanted to offer. There's many practices that we do in my tradition of just taking a breath, I think. And also then the second one is having the stability and confidence to be able to offer that brave space that we might feel inside to others. So we might be able to feel it within our hearts, and more importantly, within our somatic body, which sometimes gives us messages that we don't always absorb in our intellectual body. But then more importantly is how do we have the strength, the bravery, and also the clarity, clarity to be able to offer that brave space that Jennifer mentioned to others. And to me, this is a time of great creativity, of just being able to, what we call bear witness, to be able to enter a situation not quite knowing what the situation might present to us and not knowing what our internal resources might be. But then within that interaction, within that momentary interaction, we're able to create a flow of communication, ritual, whatever it is, music. It could be many things that actually touches both us and whoever we're caring for. And I believe that can be done. Obviously, most of my training was in person, but also can be done online, as we're increasingly being asked to do. So thank you for this time, and that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And I can't speak for those, but I know as a teaching person who's teaching faculty and doing online courses, it is definitely a time of creativity. I think you're very right in saying that. Bridget, I'd love it if you could say a few words at this time as well, please. So the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I serve as Director of Spiritual Health at Emory Hospital Midtown, and I'll just get into some of the practical experiences we've had here lately. We're real fortunate at Emory to have administration who values spiritual health for all persons, you know, in our system. And so we have access and colleagueship with our clinical partners, doctors, nurses, those who patients, as well as those who are cleaning the rooms and all the ancillary staff. And consequently, those are persons who are included in all of the spiritual care we offer. As the coronavirus has certainly taken over in these days, we have been allowed to continue our patient care with some modifications. We want to make sure that we're as healthy as we can be. We remain healthy. Consequently, we're following guidelines very strictly. We have confirmed cases here, but we have utilized PPE to actually attend to any extreme cases. But as information continues to come out, of course, we have to modify and do less of the direct interaction. So we have resorted to options. Some of that has been utilizing telephone consultations with our patients, who have been very grateful that someone has reached out and been willing, if they cannot be present, to be willing in that particular modality. Some of them have also, they're down to only allowing one visit per patient. Consequently, the persons are fewer as well. We also we've had a meeting actually this meeting with our FSAP staff, our psychiatrists, all those who are concerned about wellness, because doctors and techs, they're asking for support for their mental health. And so we're attending huddles. We're creating kind of short and sweet ways to let people know that we're present with them. We make rounds still throughout the hospital, and again, are always checking in with clinical staff about what areas in particular. We have a quarantine area, and we have others that we just have to be mindful of. And so the constant communication, we have a huddle every morning as well with one another, because we're trying to support each other, inspire and encourage to make sure there's no holes or gaps missing. So we're adjusting and being flexible, positive, and not ignoring the caution, but not moving into panic. I have been very complimentary of my staff who have remained very steady and vigilant in our consciousness. So we're also exploring how to offer using our care channels and Zoom, even possible face-to-face chatting with patients and staff. They have said just the knowing that constant presence is there calms them. So I'll just offer that and then allow to share, and I can come back around. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Bridget. That's extremely helpful. There's a number of questions that we're getting that are kind of touching on some of the things you addressed, and so we'll probably come back to some of those logistical comments as well. Trace, I'd love it if you could offer a few comments at this time.
Sure, and building a little on what we're hearing from Bridget, there's a real concern for the care of staff, especially as staff become infected and or become exposed, and so wind up quarantined, reducing the overall staff care so that we have fewer people able to provide the care, which just adds to the layers of stress. It becomes a stress upon stress upon stress model, which has been really, really difficult for a number of folks. One of the things that people have begun to do is try to record modules, record spiritual care support pieces that are available on demand so that people can access them whenever they choose, rather than trying to schedule times during the days, because everything feels so reactive and on demand right now that it's been a real challenge. The flip side of that is we're hearing from an increasing number of healthcare sites that are considering people who are doing internships, so say extended units of CPE or introductory units. If they are not paid for those positions, then they're not being allowed to visit on the floors. They're being removed from the floors. That's created yet another external level of strife of people then who need those units for whatever kind of certification or qualification they might be working on. In most of those cases, folks are being offered all of the didactic and supervisory pieces through Zoom or other kinds of modalities, Skype, Teams, and then offered a half a unit of credit rather than a full credit, with an option of picking up the second half later on. So folks are trying to be as creative as they can be within the constraints of how all this is developed. I think the key piece right now is trying to develop resources which people can use as they need them, rather than trying to coordinate people into spaces that fit within schedules. That shift in the way we think about these things feels really, really important. And I think in some ways, even this gathering is an example of that.
Thank you, Trace. I appreciate that. And Tahara, we'll kind of conclude these comments with you, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank Wendy and Michael and Trace for the invitation to just share a few words about my experiences here at MedStar Washington Hospital Center and what we're doing and how we're adjusting. I'm joined by some of the spiritual care staff, our director, some of the staff chaplains, 2 of our chaplain residents are here. They are at the front lines of care for our patients. And what I've been thinking about is how we are being called to be present when what we're hearing in the media and hearing from our government is to stay at home. However, we are showing up, and the chaplains here in a healthcare setting, have to show up for patients. So I started thinking about that. What does it mean to stay at home? And I wrote a reflection about that that I'd like to share, and then we can open it up for questions. But what I wrote was the message across news agencies and from our government is stay home, stay inside, don't go out, don't interact, don't touch, be socially distant, disconnect. And in the midst of this frenzy and panic and anxiety, what I need and what I think many of us need is connection, is to be touched, is to be held. So I thought about, what does it mean to stay home and what would that look like? This new term of social distancing, what would that be like? And I thought about from the Islamic tradition, we have an ethical value, and it's very congruent with medical bioethics, and that is to do no harm, prevent harm, and remove harm. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is the distance that we're being asked to keep, and we're trying to find this delicate balance between showing up here at MedStar and being safe with our families at home, is this ethical value of being cautious, being careful, not to cause harm to others. One of the things I thought about too is just to be able to name with colleagues and on Zoom calls with other caregivers, just the things that we've lost, to recognize the grief that we've experienced. For example, some of the things that we may have lost in this new normal, as we call it, would be ritual. This is the first time in my whole life that Juma prayer on a Friday in a mosque wasn't available, or to go to the mosque for sunset prayer or sunrise prayer is just not available. So loss of sacred rituals with our community. The going to a movie out of fear and anxiety of what could happen. One of the other things I wanted to share before I close is in the Islamic tradition, we have this idea of the divine as this compassionate spirit that covers all of creation. And that word is also connected to community, this compassionate community that we are all a part of. And it's also connected to the mother's womb, that we emerge from this compassionate, dark, hidden space into the world. So being isolated and going inside feels contrary to that, but also I understand the value of keeping others safe. So I just wanted to stop there, but I just think it's really vital for us, and I have found Zoom to be very helpful in staying connected. I think it's really vital right now to find ways to be present with others, to socialize, to have meaningful experiences within our homes or within our families, to feel loved and cared for as we navigate uncertainty, anxiety, fear, stress, loss, vulnerability, and maybe even, financial, how will this virus impact our families financially? So I think in the midst of all the anxiety, to find ways to care for ourselves is very important.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your comments. We've gotten a lot of great questions in. I'm going to do my best to kind of mix and mold them together. And some of you have touched briefly on some of them in your intros, but I'd love to hear either people elaborate or others jump in. So we've had a number of comments and questions that have asked about, the chaplain's role as a person of presence and the presence of the chaplain. And some very practical questions about how people are providing this via Skype and Zoom, but also what it's looking like for those of you in healthcare with your staff, if they're in their busyness and things like that. How are you finding these moments to care for them and support them in those manners? I'd be very interested to hear that.
I'd like to share that as a consistent practice, even prior to this outbreak, I teach my chaplains and my staff to do what I call the pastoral wave. And I call it that because there is a brief, consistent practice to say, I'll be here each day and I see you with some interest. I might not stop to have a longer conversation, but as I build a bridge and a pattern in terms of you knowing that I'm going to be here, the times when you need me, you'll pull me, which means I may not be engaging less than 6 feet, 3 to 6 feet as a general rule. However, I'm available with interest. And so we have just made sure that we are present and consistent. And then we offer a type of inspiration, something that is one word that they might be able to take. Y'all may know that at Emory, we offer cognitive-based compassion training, for all of our resident chaplains and staff. A part of that is what's called recalling a nurturing moment that helps to sustain people through difficult times. And that might be something that they're familiar with that we ask them to draw upon while they're going through difficult times, or some type of similar practice. But it doesn't mean we have to hug and be engaged for long periods of time, but the consistency is the thing that has been most helpful. Someone asked in one of the questions, situation, what does that look like? People may not be hugging closely, but they do have to check in every day, and they requested that we be present to offer something that just can sustain throughout the day. That's one.
Bridget, can you repeat just what you said about the huddle there? Unfortunately, you broke up right at the crucial moment of telling us about how you guys are doing that in 6 weeks. So if you could just repeat that, that'd be great.
Okay, I know the connections sound tough in general. If I talk slowly, do you hear me better? If I talk slow?
Yep, that's much better.
Okay, so I think in the huddle, the last thing I said was we still have to huddle if still at a distance, but you got the nurturing moment, right? You got all of that, correct?
Yep.
The last part was perhaps coming up with a similar type of practice, an inspiration, a reading, or just a word that they could carry throughout the day. And if they need more time, ensure them that they can call and leave a resource.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really helpful in that regard. Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, I just wanted to mention on an inner level, we have a Zen practice of bearing witness, and the first step is actually called not knowing. So I think right now we're being bombarded with a lot of knowing. You know, just every moment there's guidelines and you know, evidence and news. So my guideline would be, and I practiced this clinically actually when I was on the floors, is that we actually need to take a moment, and it could just be a breath or some of the things we've talked about already on the call, of putting down our agenda somehow, of giving space before we enter that room or whatever the situation is, that chat room or whatever it is, of not knowing. And that actually allows an ability to actually listen and hear. And it might be listening somatically, it might be listening to the words, it might be listening to the emotions, but listening to what's being presented to us. And to me, that's where the creativity comes in, because in that listening, we'll listen to ourselves as well, and things will be evoked. The prayer that is appropriate, or the gesture that is appropriate, or the huddle, or that Bridget mentioned, whatever arises that's appropriate for that particular time, for that particular patient, that family. But I think it starts with somehow being able to give our, you know, not knowing. We talked about space a little bit at the top of the call, but somehow giving some kind of putting down an agenda that we might have, an intention. There's always so much speed and protocol in the medical care system. So to sort of be able to breathe, not know within that. The medical care system's built on knowing. So we're, you know, it's a little counterintuitive. I mean, there is a whole path of practicing chaplaincy, which is knowing what's appropriate. But I think that appropriateness, which is joined with authenticity, it's not just a list of things that we're accessing from our virtual memory banks, but it's more having to do with the authenticity of our heart, of the moment, and being able to connect with people through that.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Want to move on to another question. We're getting a number, and Carrie, I'm going to posit these towards you. People are asking if, Carrie, you can just talk a little bit about the moral stress you discussed earlier, feeling the responsibility to care for patients, which may conflict with the personal need to care for elders or other vulnerable people in our own lives. But then also, Mary Davis asked if we could get that distinction again between those who internalize stress and those who externalize it as well. A number of questions about us as chaplains being the middle person, taking on some of that stress and what it does to us, not only internally, personally, but also in our communication with others, both personal and professional.
Yeah, I'd like to highlight really important research that was done with Vietnam veterans that demonstrated, I think, that if people can receive spiritual care to help them cope with moral struggles in the midst of traumatic experiences, it lessens the chance of developing post-traumatic stress. So doctors that are on the front line and healthcare workers that are making decisions where they have to choose whose lives they will protect are facing tremendous moral stress. We all are right now, with the potential for moral injury. And the more we can help people use spiritual practices to ground them, especially as they experience lament, then we can circle back with them, and at some point when there's space and time, help them interrogate the moral stress they've experienced. And if people can experience the kind of pastoral care, spiritual care that addresses moral struggles that I described in the article I just posted, it alleviates potential post-traumatic stress down the road. We're all experiencing acute moral stress. But if we can give and receive spiritual care that really respects each other, this will alleviate the potential possibly of moral injury and post-traumatic stress.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to jump on anything Carrie said there or not. Feel free to. Okay. We're getting a number of questions also in regards to caring for communities with that might be in end-of-life situations and family members, interacting with family members, in particular those who can or cannot visit and those who may or may not be able to travel. I was wondering if anyone on the panel wouldn't mind just touching base on some suggestions they had for chaplains, and also kind of ways chaplains can support both the person who is struggling in that way, but also the family who is trying to get close and things like that.
I just read a little bit about this in terms of our limitations here at Emory, allowing only one family member per patient to visit, and they have limited access into the hospital at particular entrances. One of my chaplains just recently was able to talk with the patient via teleconference, because they're not all going into rooms anymore. Like I said, as the directives come forward, we are following and modifying. So what he was told was that this patient has been receiving calls from their pastor and their families. It's harder because, of course, they can't be there with them, but they understand. And we are willing to serve as a part of the community and group to receive the family's number, just as well that if we can teleconference everyone in. And I even would go so far as to say, we haven't done it yet, we have Zoom links that if we can Zoom all the family members in, if they have a phone, we would help to mediate, to facilitate that for them. Some way of just connecting that wouldn't take a lot to do.
I don't know if there's anyone else who cares to jump in on that one as well.
They do allow, if a death comes, actually, they do allow more people to come. They have some very strict guidelines about how they will enter the space. That's what I was reading. I meant to say that in certain cases, they're going to allow more people in.
Can I just add something really quickly? One of the things that we have to adjust here is that the limitation on patient visitors and family members. So having other ways of communicating with the family for even family meetings, we're limited to a certain number of people who can come in these very vital, important family meetings where important healthcare decisions are being made. I know that there are some things in place where you can use the video conferencing to bring people into the room to, so people don't feel so isolated. One of the things that we've been concerned about is isolation, especially with our elderly, and how people are still feeling loved and supported in a situation where they can't have as many of their loved ones around them, as well as being disconnected from certain rituals. Right now, even in our chapel, where every morning at 9 a.m., we would have what we call like a community gathering where someone from our staff would present maybe a 10-minute moment of encouragement. We've had to discontinue that. So the hospital has lost that moment of spirituality or connection. So we're trying to think of innovative ways to still stay connected so patients and families can feel connected. And our director, Dr. Emmanuel Saidi, director of spiritual care, has been involved in leadership meetings where we've been coming up with innovative ideas on how to do our best in the midst of all of this anxiety and stress.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that we have been facing here, and also other people are facing, is that there is that loss of connection. We can't touch, we can't, you can't do this, you can't do this. So there's been an ongoing challenge. So for example, as Tahara said, we used to start the day with a community-centering moment. And with the directive yesterday that we should limit that to 9, 10 people, that is gone. So what we are trying to do now is to educate the staff on how they can utilize us, to involve us as much as they can. Phone call, we can even pray with the patient using the phone, on the phone, so that touch is not completely lost. And we have made it a point to, as much as we can, to be present when the leadership are huddling on what do we need to do so that the spiritual care presence is not just for the patients, but also for the staff. Because we are seeing that even the staff is having a lot of anxiety. And so how do we sort of work with the staff to help them with their own anxieties?
Thank you guys so much, yeah. We've talked a lot about healthcare chaplaincy, and that makes a lot of sense given that this is a health crisis. But I also know that there's a lot of non-healthcare chaplains who are on this call, and it has become more than just a healthcare crisis in that way. So I wanted to go to Jennifer first, and then I'll hop over to Trace. But Jennifer, can you talk just a little bit about what chaplaincy is going to look like, or looks like for you in the community right now? That would be really helpful, and kind of things you're doing. I'll also add that I'm an educational chaplain, and so that's kind of the angle I'm coming from in that way. After that, Trace, I'd love you just to chime in regards to how chaplaincy in prisons is being affected through this too. So Jennifer and then Trace, please.
Sure. The short answer is it's changed a lot in the last week and a half, particularly here in Nashville, where we were in sort of disaster response mode. And so forms of chaplaincy very much look like showing up and being physically present in community, bringing resources to folks where they most needed them, being able to hold space in physical locations. And I think as many folks are expressing on the call and in the chat box, that's what we do, right? We're used to being the folks who are able to be a physical presence for folks. And so there have been ways in which I've seen, in particular over the last week and a half, a shift in how folks are beginning to hold space and show up virtually in these times. So I want to speak to two different ways in which I've seen that happening. The first is specifically for chaplains who are serving communities. I've been really struck by the number of calls like this one and Facebook groups that have popped up as just spaces to share direct resources and for folks to be able to ask questions of how to show up. You know, I'm a part of a large Facebook group now that I joined yesterday that has over 4,000 clergy folks who are thinking regularly about, you know, what do funerals look like at this time? How are we going to navigate Passover and Easter, right? How are we going to think about what it means to do community together? And there have been some really creative responses. I've seen everything from folks to greater or lesser degrees being able to host singing circles together, right? To have spaces for, I have a friend who is one of our local movement chaplains here in Nashville who's reading a poem every morning at 8:30, right? And so that those spaces have become leveraging Zoom and Google Hangouts, or this old, I mean, I'm a millennial, but this thing called the phone that I could actually like dial numbers on and reach people is like this huge intervention in my life. I'm so used to texting with it or leveraging different technologies on it. And so part of what I've been noticing are creative ways in which people are both leveraging technology and a return to things like phone calls to check in on elders, to reach out to folks. The second thing I'll name is that in addition to holding spaces and figuring out creative ways to hold spaces, whether that's online singing circles or poetry readings, or for some of our colleagues, virtual tea time has been really interesting as a way to hold space for community, that there has been an attention to and thinking about how we care for chaplains and those who are caregivers in this moment. And so that while there are certainly some resource sharing of tools that is happening for how to serve community, I've also noticed within our community, and this is something that in the next week and a half, we're going to be launching a series of midweek motivational moments for chaplains, faith leaders, and others, just to gather and be in community with one another once a week on Wednesday at that peak time when, if you are like me, hump day is real, right? So to gather for just 30 minutes, and that is directly directed towards those who are providing healing spaces for others, for us to have a space to circle up and be held in community. And so I name those as two different approaches that what I've been noticing in our world is both an attention to and real generosity around resource sharing for how to serve populations that we typically serve, whatever that might look like in your context, but also a real attention to like, how do we hold space for ourselves in this moment to be fed and filled up with one another?
Awesome. And Trace, I'm sorry, I'm going to pop in just quickly, just to echo that too. The power of an email or a note that says, hey, I was thinking about you. How are you doing through this? I think that, you know, I'm all for big, grand things that can help us all out, but I think the power of just a simple personal connection that says, you came to mind, and I personally just needed to know how you're doing through this. That goes an awfully long way depending on the person and the context with your relationship. I've utilized that. I emailed every faculty and staff member in the last 24 hours, something of that nature, just to be that touch point like that. So I think those really intentional small things can go a long way. Trace, I'd love for you to chat about what the chaplaincy may look like for prisons right now. We also just got a question into the chat about a volunteer Buddhist chaplain at a prison, and no volunteers are being allowed into the prison anymore. They cannot contact these men or women, I'm sorry, I don't know the gender of the prison, but then what suggestions they could have too there. So Trace, I'll pop it over to you.
So one of the things we're hearing is that it's varying widely, whether you're talking federal, state, or county level institutions, that each one seems to be, like a lot of us, sort of making up the rules as they're going along, trying to figure out what the best practices might be. And the responses have been from higher tech to the lowest tech that we've heard so far. The higher tech stuff, We heard of one chaplain who is sort of going cell by cell, that their institution has been doing many more lockdowns in the interest of keeping people from mixing with one another and fear that there might be virus already present among them. They don't know yet, so there's some anxiety there. But the chaplain is asking people to talk about what sort of spiritual resources they have and is recording that, putting those together. And then there's a couple of times during the day where the people are able to rotate through a more common space, and they're playing those recordings within the common space. All the way down to the low-tech version of that, which might work for the Buddhist chaplain in the volunteer setting, where they've set up something very much like a pen pal process of writing letters to one another. You know, I think in these times of great crisis, low-tech often comes into the rescue. You know, the mail is all of a sudden a vital resource for people in ways that we thought email was going to wipe it out. And yet all of a sudden, mail becomes a really important way of communicating with one another. I think we're seeing those sorts of communication tools for people that don't have any other kind of access to be really important. The other thing that the chaplain in one of the state prisons was indicating was they have set up a schedule and intensified the schedule, advocated with the warden's office to allow more telephone use for people to be able to reach out and communicate via telephone with family members. And that's an expensive option. As many of you know, often the way that phone systems are set up there can be very pricey. But even the simple couple of minutes of connection with a family member can really ease concerns and help mitigate some of the anger that people are experiencing within those kinds of institutions. There's a similar pattern we've heard from a couple of military chaplains, particularly for overseas contacts and for European stationed overseas contacts, European and Southeast Asian, where there have been a preponderance of COVID diagnosis. That's been a really important connection point for people as well. And a chaplain's job often can simply be advocating for just help your folks communicate, and that can be the thing that makes the difference. The simple communication piece can go a long way, while there are lots of other processing and deeper connection pieces we might want to be able to offer. We probably want to go with what we can get right now in a way that at least begins to bridge the gaps that people are experiencing.
Thank you. I apologize. I'm having a small moment of Korean TV analysis here, so I apologize. Gemma, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
All right. You got to go back downstairs. I'll be back down in 1 minute.
I hurt my leg. I fell off my bike.
Oh. All right, you want to go downstairs now? Thank you so much for that. We were so hoping that the childcare would last one more day.
That's why it didn't happen. You know, that's why it didn't happen.
Oh, you know what? This is something we talk about. I am enjoying the moments of brief laughter where we can in that way. So I'm so glad that that was actually a plan. We had planned to have me do this so we could end in this kind of lighthearted way. I'd love to pass it over now to Wendy and Michael, and they'll have a few things about what's coming up. I know that there's been a number of people asking about contact information for all of us. And I think, Wendy, we can probably find a way to get some of that out there. I know that we didn't talk much about educational chaplaincy, but I'm happy to chat with educational chaplains via email or Zoom if they want to discuss things further at a later time. So Wendy, off to you.
Super. So I just want to thank you, Will, and all of our panelists for your thoughts, and to all of you who've been with us. You know, we're trying to do the best to be with you, and what I would hope to leave you with is the idea that you all have a lot of the answers already amongst you. And so please use the Google Docs that are on the website. There are a lot of questions that we didn't get to, but you all, I can see in the chat, you're answering each other's questions. So if you're not sure where this is, go to our Chaplaincy Innovation Lab homepage here. Click the button here. Any resources that you send us, we will post here, but we're looking at these two particular Google Docs, and you can log on and see others on them. Ask each other questions because you're answering them here. Let's be the resource to one another, because if you connect across, it's much more efficient, okay? We're grateful for all of you. We're grateful for the work that you're doing in the midst of so much anxiety and uncertainty. Here is the information about the Zoom call we will do on Friday at 2 o'clock for anyone seeking to get some kind of telehealth chaplaincy going. Brandeis is setting up the registration right now. We hope it'll be set up in a couple of hours, and we will send that. Anyone who's been with us on this call or who registered for this call, turns out there were 1,200 people who registered for this call. We will send a recording of this conversation as soon as we can, maybe this afternoon. It just depends on how long it takes the computer software to make the recording. We will send it with the names and contact information of our panelists. A number of you have asked for things that our different panelists have read. So panelists, if you're willing to share any of your remarks, anything that's in writing, we'll send that as well. We also, I think, will gather again next Tuesday at this time at noon and be here for anyone who wants to be with us. In the meantime, as you need things, write on the Google Docs. Michael and I are reading them. Send us email and help one another. You're doing an amazing job. We're going to get through this one day at a time, and we're all here together. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Take it easy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.